Welcome to part 2 of saving a manual Copart E46 wagon. We finish the car in this episode, drive it for the first time, and find quite a few surprises once we get this thing on the road. If you missed part 1 of this series, this is a 2004 BMW 325i Touring that I found in Ontario, Canada at a Copart auction. It's manual, it seemed to be in really good shape, it had 170,000 kilometers on it, but it took this little bump in the front end, and I wanted to save it. We finished the last video off with this whole car being completely torn down, analyzing what the situation was frame-wise, and it thankfully only ended up being a small fender bender. So I ended up pulling out the frame with a tiny bit of help from a winch and a trailer and a Sunday afternoon coffee, and the frame was straight. That was all the damage there was, which brings us to today, where we get to start putting some new parts on this car and getting it ready for my daily use. First things first was to replace the hood cables. It's a really easy job on E46s, but all the more accessible when the core support is off, so I bought some new cables and replaced these. I was able to source the replacement body panels that I needed in the right color, along with these really cool headlights, from a local parts guy that had a Titan silver fender, hood, bumper, and headlights for this car. While I was waiting for some new parts to come in on the front end, I wanted to piece the interior back together. This car was oddly missing a couple interior pieces, probably just stolen while it was sitting at the Copart lot. It was missing a head unit, some multiple dash trims, door pieces, shifter, all these strange little pieces from the interior. So I managed to get a parts car and steal the pieces that I needed. A lot of people don't like the silver trim, but I have a strange soft spot for it. I think it's just really simple and classy, especially not being a fancy interior. It's just a base package car, it doesn't even have sport seats, so I wanted to stick with the base trim on it. Now, I fully realize that's an E90 shift knob, and it's for a 6-speed, not a 5-speed, but that's going to change when I do a shifter rebuild kit. I'm going to find a nice ZHP knob and maybe some Alcantara suede shift boot for it at some point, but for now, it's going to have to work. I bought these headlights from the same guy that I was able to find all the Titan silver body panels for. He didn't know, and I don't know what kind of headlights they are, but I think they look pretty cool. The blacked out housings on the bright silvers, a pretty nice contrast. I'm not going to wire up the angel eyes, it's just not my style, but they look pretty good when the headlights are just in their regular running without the angel eyes lit up. I finished up the core support and kind of wrapped up the front end of this car, reinstalled the crash bars, wired up everything, and even got the headlight washers to work at the same time. And this car was ready for a front bumper. By some miracle, all the body panels actually lined up really well with a few tweaks of the hood. All the body lines were really flush on the car. I really lucked out here because I was worried I was going to be there for days trying to get everything to line up. It's not 1000%, but it's more than good. I really want to put an M-Tech bumper on this car. M-Tech Tourings just have such a cool look, and I actually managed to get some M-Tech style side skirts for the car we're going to install here in a little bit. But that's going to have to wait because this bumper is still intact, which makes this even more budget friendly than it was before.
It's weird.
And with the front end back together in just a few hours, I'm able to turn my attention to the mechanical side of this car. During my front end inspection, I noticed that the inner and outer tire rods were in pretty rough shape and the lollipops were in desperate need of being replaced. So since the car was going to have to get aligned anyway, I went ahead and replaced these items. That way it's done and out of the way. The control arms are still in great shape though, which is great. Pretty self-explanatory as to why I'm replacing this. Lollipops are the maintenance item on pretty much any of these early model BMWs. It's a pretty stark difference, new and old. With the front end all back together and the car actually starting to look whole, I got the washer jets all back together. I was able to save all the lines from the original car without even a single fitting breaking. So I got that all pieced back together so that this thing was one step closer to its mechanical safety. Having an E46 with rockers this clean in Canada is pretty uncommon and probably for everyone in the Rust Belt, so I want to keep it that way. So I am adding the terribly ugly but fantastic rust proofing additive on all of these rockers, and I'm going to do this quite a few times through the year, including a full once over of the car, to try to keep this thing in as good a shape as possible. After finding some time in a crazy work schedule, I finally was able to get this car completely wrapped up and finished a few days later, and the wheels are going back on for its first test drive. I took it up and down the road in front of the shop a few times just to see how it felt, and there was no surprises, which was so nice. So it was just in time for the car to get its structural safety, to get its salvage title removed. But not before I gave her a little spit shine, just so it presented that extra mile for the structural safety guys. Just in time for the structural safety, my other side corner light came in. I only had a mismatched pair of clear versus dark lights and a matching pair of blacked out housings. Really finished off the front end of the car. I loaded the car up onto the trailer and hauled it over to Fast Auto Concepts to have the front end all aligned and checked out, because in Ontario, when you do a structural safety, you have to have proof that the whole front end aligns properly. These guys are in Southern Ontario, in the Durham region, do everything outside of just maintaining an old E46, mainly race fabrication and support, fielding a couple Audi race cars that were in progress in this video. These guys are the real deal. I bring them all my own work. With proof that the car was all aligned, it passed the structural safety with flying colors, and now it was time to get it mechanically ready and perfected for the Ontario safety to finally put some plates on this thing. For some reason, when I got the car from the auction, the muffler was chopped off, probably for the same reason the interior is missing random pieces. There's really no good reason why. But for it to pass the safety, I have to have a complete exhaust system. I had a safety guy, didn't seem to mind if the car was muffler deleted, so while I still hunted for a stock exhaust, I just whipped up a quick muffler delete for the car so that at least it had a complete system on it. And honestly, it's still very quiet with the cats and twin resonators. I tacked the exhaust into place and then welded it up. Good enough for a safety for now while I waited for a proper exhaust for the car. Actually has a pretty nice throaty sound with muffler delete. It's a little drony inside, but that's okay. I swapped over the BMW emblems on the keys just to give it that final touch, and now it's time to do some brakes and a few other goodies. The pads and rotors actually would have been fine if the car hadn't sat for so long, but especially on the rear brakes and the one side rotor, it was so pitted and scaled from being sitting at the auction for so long. And this is a car I want to enjoy and actually have fun with, so I put some really good high quality Pagid rotors and pads on the car and tackled a lot of little things in the meantime, like the end links had a lot of play and would click when you were driving the car. Quinn gave me a hand late night after work to do all four corners of the car, and I wanted to do calipers at the same time, but they weren't in stock, but I figured for now, it should at least get me down the road for a few weeks. Onto my creature comforts. The car head unit had an auxiliary option for it, but I didn't have the cable, so I sourced one from a parts car that I had and cleanly routed it inside the cubby of the center console so that I could have Bluetooth in the car. And wouldn't you know that not even on my first night drive home, 2 of the calipers were seized up. So much for driving this car around on those calipers. I had to wait a week for the right parts to come in. I painted them and decided to swap over all 4 calipers so that I could just be done with it. If you look at the rotors in this next clip, you can see the contact patch hasn't even worn off the fresh paint on the rotor in the one spot from them being seized so badly. But the fun wasn't over yet. My second night home, the Guibo exploded and made all kinds of noise. So off to another job. Okay, that was a fun one. That is the state of the Guibo. And I didn't want to pull the full exhaust off because, like most E46s, the headers are very corroded. So if you ever have to remove a Guibo, this is gonna be manual only. Automatic's too long. I dropped the full exhaust and hung it from the headers, undid transmission mounts and let the drivetrain drop. And that gives you just enough room to move the heat shield, undo the center support bearing for the drive shaft, and you can snake the Guibo out. That's a nice little trick instead of pulling full exhaust and doing full drive shaft like you see in most tutorials and DIYs. I hopped in the car and just ran it through all the gears without the brakes, anything connected, to make sure that the crazy slapping noise that I had was in fact a Guibo. I was positive that it was, but it doesn't hurt to check while everything was apart. And it was a success. It was exactly what I thought. Just a Guibo that had kind of blown apart, and all the fibers of it were starting to hit the trans tunnel, shake the car really bad. So finally, it was all finished up, and I was really hoping that my drive home on the third night was going to be just a little bit less eventful. If you don't have one of these and you work on cars pretty frequently, this was the best 120 bucks I ever spent. It's a Motive power bleeder, one-man bleeder for brake systems. I've used it for clutch, slave cylinders as well, which is a nightmare on BMWs. And you can see here that the state of the brake fluid is just terrible. So it was all bled and ready to go. Finally, I took the car out for my first night with it properly running and together with no problems, and it was very refreshing. It worked really well, and the car actually sounds pretty good. This car is honestly so much fun to drive. It's hilarious that it's a wagon, and it's by no means fast, but it's just a really good, engaging, fun car to drive every day. I really enjoy it. But this is an 18-year-old BMW, and it wasn't even a couple days later, I was back working on this thing again. I noticed the car was having a lot of trouble trying to maintain heat, so I had a thermostat that was stuck open. Very common for any car that's been sitting at an auction for a while. I don't even want to know how long this was there, but it was for a hot minute for sure. So I did everything while I was in there. The radiator was actually fairly new, but I did the upper and lower rad hoses, the thermostat, and the water pump and accessory belt as well, just to do everything properly and not have to worry about this again. I was just about to take the car around for its coolant flush test run just to make sure it's not overheating. And ever since I've driven the car a little bit, I've noticed that there was a little bit of a rattle in the top. I suspected it was diesel valve, and unfortunately I was correct. This is the nemesis of the M54 engines. The diesel valve sits right in the very top center, right above throttle body. It's responsible for controlling airflow, so essentially giving you more torque around town, more power up top, etc. But inside there's a little electrical motor that controls this flap to do that, and this should be giving me some resistance. You should be able to feel almost spring pressure when you turn this, and there's nothing. I can actually move this back around. So airflow going through the intake, what I was hearing was that little wiggle when the engine was running. So they do, the earlier model diesel valves, they have a little steel collar. This one's plastic at the very end, and they back out and get sucked into the intake valves. So then that's a really unfortunate time. This one is fine. So it's gonna go back in just to go for driving for now until the replacement comes in, but that's definitely something to check on these M54s.
Fast forward to today, almost 8 months after the pictures that you're seeing right now. This car has been absolutely flawless. It's been my daily, it's been perfect. I've barely worked on it the entire year. It was well worth the effort because I'm into this car for a hilariously small amount of money, and I love it. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a joy to drive. And the brown interior you see right now is actually the same car. I love this car so much that I bought a scrap E46 Touring that had this beautiful interior in it, and I swapped that in as kind of the cherry on top just to enjoy the car. And I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. It was well worth the effort, well worth the struggle. And now it's time for the next project. I'll post some more videos soon. Thanks guys, bye.